CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Tea for two. US President Joe Biden tells UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak that relations are rock solid as a row over cluster bombs rumbles on. The US President is en route to a major NATO summit in Lithuania as Ukraine seeks assurances over future membership. The Kremlin says Russian President Vladimir Putin has met the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. And homes, roads and bridges washed away. Heavy rain and deadly flooding in India sees widespread devastation. President Joe Biden has told the British Prime Minister that relations between the United States and the UK are rock solid. He's in the UK for a brief stopover en route to a NATO summit in Lithuania. This all comes amid tension among Western allies over the US decision to send cluster bombs to Ukraine. Biden also met King Charles in Windsor. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, in London. Stuart, so a pretty brief visit from President Biden. Is this just a sort of gesture, or is there more to read into it than that?
Yeah, a bit of both, it seems. Definitely ceremonial on the one hand, but also substantive too. The ceremonial part was mostly related to the US President's visit to King Charles III, the first time since his coronation at Windsor Castle, where they discussed how finance could be put to good use in trying to solve and mitigate the effects of climate change. Entrepreneurs and philanthropists gathered with the heads of state there to talk about how that money can be used. But earlier in the day, with the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, President Biden spoke about something called the Atlantic Declaration, a package of measures designed to improve the relationship economically between the UK and US, as well as agree on cooperation on other areas like artificial intelligence, data information, data and data protection, and also defence cooperation, as well as lowering trade barriers. A catch-all package in the face of, or rather in the wake of a lack of a UK-US trade deal. And Jake Sullivan, to reporters on board Air Force One as Joe Biden flew over to Britain, suggested that so much has happened in the last month since Rishi Sunak was in Washington. There are strategies to discuss and also notes to share when it comes to this NATO summit coming up in Vilnius.
There's a good deal of tension ahead of this visit, isn't there, over Ukraine weapons?
Yeah, cluster munitions is the big one. Not so much tension, it seems, between the UK and US, at least publicly, on that fact, despite that the UK is one of the signatories to an agreement that bans the encouragement of using and also the transfer of cluster munitions to countries. The Prime Minister here has been very tactful to try to avoid criticising the US while also sticking to the UK's legal obligations. And Washington seems to have accepted that, though we don't know whether it was brought up in discussions earlier on Monday.
That aside, a lot of anticipation ahead of this NATO summit. What else is on the agenda? What else is on the table?
The big one is how can Ukraine join NATO, with most member states wanting that to take place, but they all, well, almost all agree that shouldn't happen now, until after the war against Russia is over. Where there's disagreement, it's usually the Eastern European member states suggesting that actually admitting Ukraine to NATO would be the best thing to do right now, but NATO is concerned about getting into a war with Russia. But the other big development is how to get Sweden into NATO. Most member states, again, on board with that, but not Hungary nor Turkey. And in a bombshell move on Monday, the President Erdogan suggested that he is linking the potential accession of Sweden into NATO with the potential for Turkey to get into the European Union. Two totally different organisations that really will make negotiations on Tuesday and Wednesday even more difficult for NATO member state leaders.
I call on those countries that have kept Turkey waiting at the gates of the European Union for more than 50 years, and I will make this call in Vilnius. open the way for Turkey's membership of the European Union. When you pave the way for Turkey, we'll pave the way for Sweden, as we did for Finland.
Adding to that, the Washington's National Security Secretary suggested that also whether F-16 planes get sent from America to Turkey could be part of one of those conditions. It's not making it explicit, but the implication is this, that there are now a lot of angles to this negotiation. That means Sweden's hopes of joining NATO anytime soon seem slimmer than they were even a day ago.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in London. Well, ahead of that NATO summit, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky asked NATO members for clear security guarantees. Let's talk to our correspondent Stephanie Freed in the Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv. Stephanie, what does President Zelensky want out of this NATO summit?
Well, when you talk about security guarantees, the reference seems to keep recurring or coming back, which is the reference to the U.S. administration's security guarantees with Israel. And that's the model that apparently NATO is looking at. That's the model that apparently President Zelensky is somewhat looking toward or for. And what does that mean? What does that include? Well, the deal with Israel, it's a 10-year package with the U.S. administration in Israel, and that includes financial, military, joint production. This would be a defensive, basically defensive guarantees or defense guarantees. It would be a multi-year pipeline guarantees for Ukraine, a means of self-defense. It would include, again, weapons, arms, training, joint training, information sharing, and possibly post-war reconstruction commitments. So that's the understanding, is that that seems to be the model that NATO's looking at, and that seems to be the model that is mostly what Volodymyr Zelensky is looking for.
Stephanie, that's for the future in a sense. Let's talk about the here and now. And Ukraine says its military forces are making progress on the front line.
Well, that's right, Jamie. And the President, Zelensky, he had a statement or issued a statement and talked from the front line of hundreds of kilometers regained. However, I'm going to defer to more neutral parties and sources, neutral parties and sources meaning intelligence community sources that say those gains aren't happening, not that they're seeing from imagery, satellite imagery. What they're seeing is battling in Bakhmut area, Zaporizhia. A report from Russia that Ukraine has drones flying around the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and that they will respond as necessary. Reports that a Russian strike killed 4 people in the Zaporizhia area today. But these gains that you're talking about, Jamie, or that the president here is talking about, again, I'm going back to the intelligence community. They're just not seeing much in terms of those military gains.
Stephanie, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed in Ukraine. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has met the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. The Kremlin says the meeting took place on the 29th of June, just days after the rebellion of the Wagner group. Let's talk to our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Dasha, what more do we know about this meeting?
Well, that's right. The Kremlin has confirmed that the Russian president has met with the unit commanders of the Wagner group, as well as the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, just 5 days after the aborted mutiny on the 24th of June. So this meeting took place at the Kremlin on the 29th of June and lasted for 3 hours. That's according to the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov. We understand it involves 35 people in total. The commander of the units of the Wagner fighters have been outlining their position and have been given their vision of what has happened. And the Russian president, according to the Kremlin, has also given his assessment of what has happened on the 23rd and 24th of June. We also understand that the Russian president has made some employment options to those Wagner fighters, and also those commanders have been given an opportunity to outline what they thought about what happened. But very importantly, as we have heard from the Kremlin, the commanders and the fighters fighters have said that they were staunch supporters of the Russian president and soldiers who were ready to fight for their motherland. But of course, the meeting has taken place just 5 days after the aborted mutiny, and we have heard before from the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, suggesting that Yevgeny Prigozhin is a free man. So certainly this is a very significant meeting, and the very fact that the Kremlin has made it public now suggests that the Russian authorities are not facing any threat, or at least do not feel that there is any threat coming from the Wagner Group.
Well, let's talk about Russia's top general, General Gerasimov, who's made his first public appearance after the Wagner rebellion.
Well, that's right. Earlier today, we have seen the footage released by Russia's Ministry of Defense showing Valery Gerasimov in one of the command posts, listening to his subordinates, giving the orders, and also listening to the reports. Now, as we understand, that is his first public appearance since this aborted mutiny. We haven't seen him anywhere before that. But also what's important is the very fact that in this meeting, he was listening to the reports of the head of the Russian Air Defense Forces, who is actually the deputy to Sergei Surovikin. So what we have heard was that Russia has managed to intercept 4 ballistic targets that were aiming the Crimea as well as Rostov and Kaluga region. So in this meeting, Gerasimov has given the orders to intensify the identification process of the storage facilities of Ukraine, where those ballistic missiles are held, that are afterwards targeting the Russian territory. He was also saying that Russia has to make sure that its air defense systems are beefed up sufficiently to make sure that in the future, as it has been the case now, all of those ballistic targets are intercepted before they land on the Russian territory.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, roads turned into rivers, homes and bridges destroyed. India sees widespread devastation after heavy rain.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. US President Joe Biden tells UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak that relations are rock solid as the row over cluster bombs rumbles on. The US President is en route to a major NATO summit in Lithuania as Ukraine seeks assurances over future membership. And the Kremlin says Russian President Vladimir Putin has held talks with the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Spanish rescuers say they have found what could be a migrant boat that went missing 2 weeks ago with around 200 passengers on board. It was travelling from Senegal to Spain's Canary Islands. Let's talk now to our correspondent Ken Brown in Madrid. Ken, so it looks like this is a breaking story. One of these boats, we believe, has been found. What's the latest you're hearing?
Yes, breaking news, a developing story here as the Spanish Coast Guard tweeted just an hour ago that its spotter plane, the Sasimar 101, has sighted one of these boats, what looks to be one of these boats. It fits the description of a boat that left the Senegalese coast on the 27th of June. The plane estimates that there are around 200 people on board, which also fits the embarkation that left from the south of Senegal. These people left on June 27th. No one has heard from them since then. The Coast Guard said that they found a Cayuco boat, which really fits the description of the type of fishing boat that's used in that part of Senegal. They were sighted around 115 kilometers south of Gran Canaria. That's around 70 miles. Now, the Coast Guard has already dispatched a rescue ship to that area. They've also talked to a container ship called the MSC Marta, which is in the zone and may be able to help. Now, they embarked from the Senegalese fishing village of Kafountine about 2 weeks ago. As I mentioned, the families have not heard from them since. But that was one of 3 vessels that left. This morning, we were talking about a story of 300 migrants missing at sea. It looks like the biggest of those 3 boats carrying 200 people may have been found.
Ken, we'll obviously get more details on this in the coming hour, but let me ask you about the crossing from West Africa to the Canary Islands. I mean, it's one of the most dangerous migrant routes in the world, and yet the numbers attempting this voyage remain so high, don't they?
Yes, and there's been a huge jump in those numbers between last summer and this year. Today we talked to the Red Cross, and they told us that last June there were around 400 people who made the crossing. This June it's been already 2,500 people. So the numbers keep rising. It's an extremely difficult and dangerous crossing. This one from Senegal, this village in Senegal, we're talking about 1,700 kilometers. That's around 1,000 miles at sea. So many people have not made it, and the question is, how can we stop this happening? We spoke to the Red Cross earlier to see what they had to say in the Canaries.
It's definitely something for the politicians to discuss. The key decision makers should sit down and work out how to regulate this. It's clear from our perspective that there are still too many lives being lost at sea with the way the current situation is. And we hope at some point these losses will bring about change.
The people who were found today are the lucky ones. There were, in 2022, we're talking about 559 people who died at sea, with many more missing. So, as we say, today, people have been found. This is a positive story, but something needs to be done.
Ken, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Ken Brown, in Madrid. Well, a new investigation has found that attempts by the Greek Coast Guard to tow a fishing boat at the centre of one of Europe's worst migrant disasters may have caused it to sink. The Coast Guard has always denied it attempted to tow the boat. Around 500 people are still missing after the vessel sank off Greece last month. There were just 104 survivors. The investigation by a consortium of journalists also found a Coast Guard closer to the incident was never sent to help. China's economy teetered on the brink of deflation last month, leading to speculation that the central bank will have to reduce interest rates again. Factory gate prices fell at the fastest pace in 7 years. They're 5.4% lower than a year ago, a figure not seen since December 2015 as demand for consumer and manufactured products softened. Consumer prices fell 0.2% compared with the previous month, missing analyst expectations of a 0.2% rise. Well, China is reeling from a stabbing at a kindergarten and the aftermath of a deadly landslide. Our correspondent Li Jianhua has been following the stories. Let's start with this school stabbing.
Jamie, it is absolutely sad news this morning that happened in China. The attack took place in Lianjiang County in South China's Guangdong province over there, as we can see. And eyewitness, let's run you some eyewitness footage which shows that, as we can see, the ambulances and police are there at the scene, and the whole area has been cordoned off. And you can also see some bodies lying on the ground in the footage. And some media, according to some media reports in China, they say that 6 people have been killed, including children. The perpetrator, a man aged 25, has been arrested. But so far, the investigation is underway and we don't know the motive right now. But Jamie, this doesn't happen a lot in China, but it has prompted some concern over safety at preschools.
It's such a rare story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Also, very, very powerful and upsetting images from this landslide. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it is in central China's Hubei province, as we can see right now on the map. And the rescue team is still searching for 7 people who are missing at this point. This came after a landslide hit a highway construction site about 2 days ago. As far as we know now, 1 person has been killed, and this is the latest in a series of landslides that has been caused by torrential rain. And Jamie, we know the rainy season in China is usually around June and is lasts all the way to early August. And authorities have been cautioning people to stay or reduce their outdoor activities.
Now, what about this heat wave that China's also seeing at the moment? That's getting a lot of headlines.
Yeah, that's true. This is a very hot summer for China, actually, as we can see that in South China, temperatures stay above 35 degrees, and in northern China, over 40 degrees, which is very unusual. Let's look at Beijing. Beijing, the Chinese capital, witnessed the record-breaking temperatures over the past week. We can see that people are doing whatever they can to shield themselves from the sun. The lit fun of they're very popular now in China. So absolutely now it is a hot summer for China, and do drink a lot of water over there, as we can see over there on the screen. Jamie.
Jianhua, thank you very much indeed. Our correspondent, Li Jianhua. Well, India's capital, New Delhi, has just seen its wettest July day in more than 40 years as heavy rain there brought deadly floods to the north of the country. Our correspondent, Ravinder Bauer, reports.
Incessant rains across North India have paralyzed normal life. Capital city and adjoining areas face a flood threat. The river Yamuna in the city is flowing almost at the danger mark. After an emergency meeting, the authorities announced that preparations to evacuate 41,000 people to relief camps have been made. Delhi government has set up 16 control rooms to monitor flood-prone areas. Delhi recorded 153 mm of rain in 24 hours, which is the highest in a single day in last 40 years. Schools in the capital were closed after heavy rains. An interaction between a western disturbance and monsoonal winds is causing intense rainfall spell over northwest India. In the hill states of the Himalayan region, flash floods and landslides are causing harm to both life and property. Some rivers in the hills are flowing above the danger mark. Several units of State Disaster Response Force and National Disaster Response Force have been deployed to evacuate people stranded on roads and inside homes. Residents have been asked to stay indoors for the next 24 hours. Municipal authorities are engaged in pumping out water from waterlogged areas. The Met Department has issued red, orange and yellow alerts for different regions. Strong winds and showers caused disruptions in power and internet connectivity in several areas. Road and rail traffic have been affected as roads have been swept away. Some trains are cancelled and others are diverted as tracks are submerged underwater. Tourists from across the country are stuck in the hill states as 765 roads are closed due to bad weather conditions. There is no respite for the next 24 to 48 hours as the Met Department says that heavy intensity rains will continue.
Heavy rain has caused extreme flooding in New York State, killing at least 1 person there. A woman in her 30s was swept away while trying to leave her home in the Hudson Valley. Floods and mudslides forced roads to close and cut power to thousands of people, prompting a state of emergency to be declared in several counties. Officials say the storm has already caused tens of millions of dollars in damage. 1 person has died and 4 are missing after landslides in Japan. The authorities there have urged tens of thousands of people to leave their homes in the affected areas amid continuous torrential rain. The director of Japan's meteorological agency has described the intensity of this rainfall as unlike anything seen before. Israel's parliament is set to vote on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's rewritten judicial overhaul later. The move has sparked unprecedented protests over its plans to limit some Supreme Court powers. Critics argue that the bill invites corruption and abuses of power. Nearly half of US tap water may be contaminated with dangerous substances known as forever chemicals. That's according to a government study. Our correspondent Jim Spellman reports now from Washington.
Nearly half of the water coming out of faucets in the U.S. is likely contaminated with chemicals known as PFAS. That, according to a new study from the U.S. government.
PFAS are an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkylated substances, and they have been used in a variety of different applications in industry and consumer products and firefighting foams, and many in the community would know these as forever chemicals.
Forever chemicals because they break down very slowly, lingering in the environment and in the human body for years.
It can cause like cancer, it can cause immunity problems, it can cause liver problems, it can cause kidney problems. There are numerous different problems that PFAS causes, even in pregnant women.
PFAS are found in thousands of everyday products: carpets, clothing, cooking pans, mobile phones, even dental floss. Manufacturing and storage of the chemicals can release PFAS into the air, soil, and water supplies. The study found concentrations of forever chemicals highest in urban areas near manufacturing sites. Last year, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency declared PFAS to be far more dangerous than previously thought. Eventually, the Biden administration hopes to hold manufacturers accountable. In recent days, manufacturing giants 3M and DuPont have settled lawsuits over PFAS contamination of water supplies.
So far, PFAS was not considered a hazardous substance, so that therefore, people or companies that have willy-nilly disposed of PFAS in the environment, did not have to pay anything for it. Now, when PFAS is identified in the environment at high concentrations, they will identify the source of the PFAS, and then they will hold those people who polluted the environment with PFAS responsible.
Proposed new rules from the Biden administration would require water suppliers to monitor levels of 6 forever chemicals more closely and potentially install new treatment systems. The new rules are expected to go into effect later this year, but even if the rules do help reduce the level of PFAS in the water supplies going forward, the health impacts of long-term exposure to these dangerous forever chemicals will likely be felt for decades to come. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
And finally, an adventurous new surfer has been hanging 10 with the locals at a San Diego beach. A baby seal has taken up the sport effortlessly, mounting people's surfboards and riding the waves with them. Locals have nicknamed the young pup Sammy and say he actively imitates humans to manipulate the surfboard. Experts at SeaWorld say despite his rather unusual behavior, Sammy appears to be a healthy, playful, normal seal posing no danger. The headlines again. US President Joe Biden tells UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak that relations are rock solid as a row over cluster bombs rumbles on. The US President is en route to a major NATO summit in Lithuania as Ukraine seeks assurances over future membership. And homes, roads and bridges washed away. Heavy rain and flooding in North India sees widespread devastation. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.